Look, y'all already saw like the title of the video. You guys saw the thumbnail. You guys see what date this is being posted, and all you guys really need to know is that number one, there was some help from Neptune for this, and on top of that, another thing I have to say is that like the power scaling is gonna be wonky. A lot of things are gonna be wonky in this what if, but this is a holiday special, so again, excuse to do so. Anyways, let's roll that intro.
何としてでも勝つ。何としてでも生きる。
Now, in this version of events, Asta would actually be born with pure white hair. He would have been on the more chubby side compared to most kids his age throughout the years. But this would not actually detract from Asta's strength though. Rather, he would actually be one of the strongest kids. Many of the foster kids would actually like Asta for his very joyous personality. On top of that, he would have also awoken his magic from a pretty early age. But when it came on to his magic though, it was quite weird. The first instance of Asta actually using his magic would be when he first produced some snow. This would have been a small amount at first, but Asta would be interested in trying to learn more about this magic. At first he thought this was going to be like some sort of snow or ice magic, so he figured that it would be best to try and strengthen this form of magic. Throughout the years he would have actually developed it into where he would be able to actually cover an entire area with snow. Basically he could cover the entire, I don't know, maybe church with snow rather than just being like a puddle's worth of snow. The kids would actually love Asta for this, since they would actually be able to build snowmen or make snow angels at any time of the year. Some would even have snowball fights in like the middle of June or something. Well, actually, let me not say that. More like in the middle of summer, you could say. Because of, well, different climates, I guess. That's why I say. Anyways, Asta would have actually been a pro when it came on to that sport though, when it came on to snowball fights, since he could actually produce snowballs of various sizes with ease at this point. Everyone would have originally thought that Asta had snow magic, but this presumption would actually turn out to be incorrect. Yuno would have been the first to actually witness Asta using something else than just snow. This would have been one day while they were walking back to the orphanage with some groceries in hand. They would end up encountering a thug which would, well, they would notice Yuno's necklace and attempt to snatch it from Yuno. They would have mentioned their intent to actually sell the necklace in order to be able to afford to get themselves more booze. Yuno would try to grab it back, only to get slammed into the ground by said thug. Asta would have been angered seeing this. He wouldn't let the thug get away with hurting one of his friends and taking away one of their valuable items either. This would have been the very first person on Asta's naughty list that year. Asta would produce a Christmas tree from right underneath the thug's feet. The thug would begin to freak out seeing this. Asta would actually demand for the thug to give Yuno back his necklace if he wanted to be put back down, and from the looks of it, it seemed that the thug was having trouble with balancing himself on said tree. The thug would refuse at first though, which would cause Asta to sigh. He would cause the tree to grow even more, causing the thug to become even more fearful. The thug would eventually comply though, and of course a branch would be produced close to the thug. The thug would realize that this was meant to be some sort of signal. This was meant for him to actually drop the necklace in order for Asta to actually get it back for Yuno. The thug would do so, and the necklace would of course be brought back to the ground for Yuno to take. Yuno would put it right back around his neck, and he would leave with Asta right after. The tree would eventually shrink down for the thug to be able to hop off, though. Asta wasn't that cruel. Yuno would question how Asta was actually able to do the whole thing with the tree, but Asta wouldn't really have an answer. He really wasn't all that sure himself. Asta would continue to learn more about the various parts to his magic from that day moving forward, though. He was able to make multiple Christmas trees of various sizes. He was also able to control their branches seemingly. Asta and Yuno would become rivals from that day moving forward, with both of them actually wanting to become Wizard King. Eventually the two of them would be gifted their own grimoires. Yuno would have gotten his hands on a 4-leaf clover grimoire, which would shock everyone within the room. Asta would receive a grimoire as well, but this one would have a snowflake rather than a clover, which would confuse everybody within the room. Someone would try to steal Yuno's grimoire after the ceremony though. Of course, Asta would just simply blast the chain magic user with snow. He would also summon a Christmas tree, encasing the individual within the branches. Asta would free Yuno from his restraints, and the two would go on to actually train for the next 6 months. They would be prepping for the magical entrance exam. Asta would create a new spell during this 6-month period, which would be the ability to create toys. It was a bit odd at first, but he would find that he could actually manipulate the size of said toys. He could even animate these toys as well. They weren't all that durable though. That was pretty much the only downside to this sort of spell. Asta would give the kids at the church some of the toys that he made during his training though, which would only make them adore Asta more. By the end of this 6-month period, Asta and Yuno would make their journey to where the exams were taking place. Asta would have created a giant chariot with toy reindeer attached in order to drag him and Yuno over to the exams at a far faster rate than they would have on foot. By the time they actually reached the exams, Asta would be exhausted from the mana use. He would replenish his mana pool by munching down on some milk and cookies though, that he actually found were being sold nearby. Throughout the exams, Asta would excel in each category. Asta would have no issues flying on a broom. When it came on to target practice, Asta would simply make snowballs to hit the targets. As far as the fights went, Asta would battle Sake, since Sake really had yet to see anything that was all that impressive from the boy. Well, anything that would cause him to think that Asta was a threat. Looking at Asta's more chubby nature in this version as well, Sake would underestimate Asta's strength. Asta, while fighting Sake, would actually sprout a large Christmas tree from underneath Sake's feet, which would shoot him into the sky. He was protected from any serious harm though, thanks to his bronze magic artillery that he produced from earlier on. The captains would witness this and be confused. They would be confused as to what Asta's magic was. The captain of the Golden Dawn would be interested in Asta's mix of tree magic due to his own magic being somewhat similar, but he would pass on Asta joining his team in the end. The Aquadeer captain would actually want Asta though. Asta would become part of said squad from there on, especially being gravitated to Real's joyous nature. reminding him somewhat of his own. Asta would, of course, be fond of how his captain acted from time to time. He liked the more childish nature of his captain, and he would find that the guy was able to really lighten up a room. He was definitely on Asta's nice list. The squad would actually go on various missions, but Asta would be called out to do a specific mission with two other members from the Aqua Deer one day. This mission would revolve around them checking out a dungeon, which was found suddenly one day. Asta would have no complaints, especially after finding out that the Wizard King himself was the one to actually request Asta's presence for this mission. Asta would go on to meet back up with Yuno and his team during this time, while basically exploring the dungeon. Apparently the Golden Dawn were also requested to do this mission. The two teams would have split up and they would encounter their own sets of enemies. Asta would fight up a man who could produce smoke, and he would produce a tree in order to actually get out of said smoke. He would get a clearer look of the individual while up on the tree. Asta would make sure to trap his enemy within a circle of trees and begin to rain down all sorts of small toys on them. They would be injured and knocked unconscious after Asta's onslaught of toy attacks. Asta would meet back up with Yuno's group once again, and this time around he would find them in the middle of a fight against an individual who could use two forms of magic: crystal and fire magic. Now when it came onto the fire magic, Asta would realize at that point that they were going to be a bit of an issue, but he would be willing to work with the hands that he was dealt here. Asta at first made a toy shield, which Mars would just simply use this fire magic to melt the large shield that Asta created. Asta was not finished though. Asta would create a dome of ice, seemingly meant to also protect the magical knights, but Mars would get annoyed, melting that down as well. His eyes would widen though when seeing that there were giant trees that were actually within said ice that he had just melted. Mars would switch to his crystal magic and form a large sword, chopping down the trees. Mars would get hit by another tree from underneath his feet though. This would have surprised Mars, but that wouldn't be the end of the attacks. The Christmas tree's roots would actually wrap around his arms and legs. Mars would be pulled back and he would be in the middle of breaking out of his restraints now. He was trying to break free from these roots, these branches, whatever you want to call them at this point, but Asta would try something new here. What Asta realized at this moment was that a new magical spell had just appeared within his grimoire. He was willing to try it out on Mars since he was the enemy here. Asta would form a staircase made out of ice in order to reach Mars. The others would be confused as to what Asta was about to do, but Asta would stare down Mars before stretching out his hand to the purple-haired boy. Mars would raise an eyebrow until Asta's hand touched his forehead. Right then and there, Asta would utter a couple of words before, Mars ended up disappearing. In his place, though, was a toy soldier. The others would be shocked seeing that Asta could turn people into toys merely by touching them. They would of course be quite fearful of him due to that fact as well. Yuno would stand up for Asta though, saying that he had known the boy for the longest and that he knew Asta wouldn't do anything to his comrades. The others were still skeptical but decided to trust the boys for now. Asta and the others would go on to find the treasure room And of course, while in said room, Yuno would find a wind pixie. This wind pixie would be capable of amplifying his wind magic. Asta would find something as well. It looked like the statue of a reindeer. Asta would rub his hand on the statue, wanting to feel its texture and examine it more. The statue's nose would begin to glow red though. This would surprise Asta. The statue would turn into an actual reindeer, and they would approach Asta before rubbing their head affectionately around his shoulder. Asta would realize they were no threat at all, and he would actually rub the reindeer's head as well. The reindeer would glow and then disappear right after, with new writing once again appearing within Asta's grimoire. Asta would find this to be odd, but he would be invested in learning more about what just happened. Asta would report how the mission went to the Wizard King, though, and the man would be disappointed in the fact that neither Asta or Yuno could actually summon their familiars again. He would offer the foster brothers the chance to go to the War Merits Clan for a mid ceremony. It was meant to actually recognize magical knights with great achievements. Julius had heard a lot about the boys from their respective captains, so he only found it fitting for the two to join. The two boys would accept and end up getting into a confrontation with the nobles after the ceremony. They would have been at a banquet during this time, and they would find a girl with silver hair getting picked on by the others. Asta would defend the girl, only for the nobles there to actually go on to pick on Asta as well, calling him short, chubby, and a simple commoner. Asta would get annoyed hearing these insults, and he would cause the room's temperature to drop. The people within the room would comment on this, wondering what was going on. Asta would declare that he would become the next Wizard King, and he'd be sure to put an end to all of this disrespect given to people from all these different walks of life. This wouldn't be taken all that kindly, or it wouldn't be taken all that well with the Silver siblings and a member of the Golden Dawn. They would all attempt to attack him in order to show him his place. A sand-armored guard would grab onto Asta, but the boy would summon several roots to break said guard. Asta would use these same roots in order to grab onto Nebra and Solid. They tried using their magic against Asta, but it had little to no effect against his roots. Nozel Silver, the leader of the Silver Eagles, would actually step in at this point and release a magical presence which would intimidate Asta, but his resolve would remain though. Asta would glare at the man, wondering if he was going to attack him as well. If Nozel did try to attack him, he would not back down though. The two would have a stare down until Regolion Vermilion, the leader of the Crimson Lions, intervened. He would have ended up stopping the situation from escalating even further. The temperature of the room would go back to normal at that point, and Leopold Vermilion would be impressed by Asta's abilities and respect Asta's resolve. He would declare Asta as his new rival from this day forward. Asta would smile hearing that, and they wouldn't be allowed to go back to complete normalcy though. This would have been because of the fact that someone would actually barge into the room with a panicked face. They would have reported that there was something happening outside. There was a serious situation. This situation meaning that the royal capital was getting attacked. Asta hearing this would be one of the first to rush out to the room. It wouldn't take long for Asta to find a perpetrator, and it would have turned out that this perpetrator was Rady Spirito. Or at least that's how I think you pronounce his name. Asta would take down all of the reanimated corpses the male produced with his magic, and it would have been with complete ease though. Asta would have had his roots grab onto Radi's feet, and he would have attempted to drag him down to the ground. Radies, in desperation, would summon a more powerful corpse than the rest that he had created up until now. He would have dubbed this corpse Number 4 Jimmy. They would have been a rather tall corpse covered in black bandages and belts. The corpse would produce several magical bullets made from cursed magic and attempt to attack Asta with said magic. Asta would try to counterattack with several snowballs and toys. Radies would laugh seeing this, until he found himself getting dragged even further down into the ground by the roots that were still there. Roots would wrap around Jimmy too, but they would be encased in the monster instead of just simply dragging him down to the ground. Asta would squeeze the corpse until it broke into several pieces. Radies would be shocked, and he was about to form another spell, but Asta would use his roots to knock him out instead. After successfully capturing Radies, Asta would begin to head back, where Golion would have witnessed how easily Asta managed to take down Jimmy and Radies. He would be impressed, and he would actually compliment Asta. Hearing this, Asta's heart would skip a beat at this moment. He was really getting recognized by a magical captain. Well, a magical captain that wasn't just real. Hearing it coming from another magical captain just felt so much more special to Asta. Golion would suddenly be teleported away from Asta's location though. Asta would search for where Golion could have disappeared to until he found a pile of corpses. He would hear someone's voice from behind those corpses, and he would use his Christmas tree roots to smash through those corpses. He would find a man wearing a distinctive robe behind said corpses. The man will open up another portal right above Asta with an unconscious Golion falling from said portal. Asta would quickly grab the Crimson Lion's captain, and he would glare at Valtos. Valtos would hear Asta utter one word and one word only. This would be naughty. Don't even get any ideas, people. Suddenly, Valtos would have chills. His body temperature would drop by a rapid rate. Valtos would collapse to the ground unconscious before Asta could do anything else to Valtos, so a group of mages would attack Asta. Asta would realize that he was at a disadvantage in numbers at that moment. Asta would create an ice barrier. This would be to protect himself and Golion from the attacks, though. The barrier would break right after the attacks collided with it, but it would have still accomplished the job of protecting Asta and Golion. Asta would then create a large Christmas tree from underneath his feet, which would send him high into the sky. Asta would rain down hail at his enemies, with the roots grabbing onto their bodies and immobilizing them. Each and every last one of these rogue mages would be knocked out from the onslaught of attacks from Asta. Each of the mages would be taken into custody afterwards. The mages would be questioned, and from this questioning they would find out that one of the magical knight captains had been allied with the Eye of the Midnight Sun for a while now. This captain being the captain of the Purple Orcas, because I refuse to say his actual name. It already looks complicated to say. The captain of the Purple Orcas, hearing this, would attempt to escape by turning invisible and fleeing the scene, but Asta would encase him in ice before he even had the chance. Everything the former captain of the Purple Orca had done would be revealed to the captains, to the rest of the captains, and of course the other magical knights that were in the room as well. Julius would order everyone to keep tight-lipped about this. They didn't want this to be revealed to the public after all. They didn't want to cause mass hysteria. Another thing that would be requested of the magical knight captains would be for them to investigate and report any suspicious activity within their squads, this being in hopes of finding another traitor or traitors. Asta would continue doing missions with the Aquadeer until Rill would inform his group about there actually being an upcoming festival one day. This festival being something the Wizard King Julius had set up, and where each magical knight squad would be ranked by the amount of stars they managed to obtain within the last year. While at the festival, Asta would be amazed by how spectacular it looked. During the announcements for Magical Knight Squad's rankings for the year, the Black Bulls would once again be in last place. No one would be all that surprised though. What shocked everyone though was the fact that they heard the Golden Dawn had actually been surpassed this year. The ones to surpass the Golden Dawn would actually be the Aquadeer, who had managed to obtain first place here. They would have had 130 stars this year, while the Golden Dawn only had 125. It was rather close, but it was still impressive nonetheless. Asta would be viewed as one of the most valued members of the Magical Knights for this year alongside Yuno, until Sake ended up mentioning this little tidbit, this teensy-weensy little tidbit. This being that that both Yuno and Asta were actually commoners. Hearing this, the crowd would begin to doubt their capabilities until the two ended up showing them what they could really do, or at least some of what they were actually capable of. All doubt would be wiped out to the audience's minds. After that announcement, King Augustus, Kira, Clover, whatever kind of title he has, would make himself known to the public. He would be a rather unimpressive king though. They honestly didn't really know who he was until Julius announced how he was apparently like their royal knight, not royal knight, but royal king or something. The kingdom still did not really care. They considered Julius to be more of a ruler than Augustus. Augustus would go on to mention how they were going to have a royal knight's exam, and Yuno and Asta would question why the king would be the one selecting the knights though, considering his lack of achievements. The king, hearing this, would actually order for both of the executions, but Julius would calm the man down. Asta and Yuno would overhear Marileona, Frey Golion's very fiery sister, and current substitute captain for the Crimson Lions, berate the team for actually falling so far behind in the rankings. She would mention how they would be training in the hot springs, but Asta and Yuno would accidentally comment on how that sounded very easy. They were planning on whispering it, but it just came out a bit too loud. Marileona would have heard what the two said and turned around, grabbing the boys with her magical flames, bringing the boys alongside her own for this training. The boys would find out that they would actually be training by a volcano. The boys would learn about Monoskin and how to use it from there on. Yuno and Asta would outperform everyone else still, making it to the top of the volcano before anybody else could really do so. The group would relax in the hot springs afterwards. The group would continue prepping for the upcoming Royal Knights exams, though for the next couple of weeks. Asta would have understood that he still needed to get stronger if he wanted to really pursue his goal of becoming, the Wizard King. He had understood that when it came on to the captains, at the very least, they were usually on a whole nother level. So Asta needed to be able to reach Magical Knight captain status first before he could ever be considered for Wizard King. The group on the day of the exams would, of course, find out what sort of teams they would be in. This would be thanks to Julius and Augustus. Augustus would actually explain the rules of said exam, and they would all be put into different teams. Asta would be paired up with Mimosa Vermilion, and apologies if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but then again, I don't think we've ever actually met this character. Zerx Lugner. You'll understand what I mean by we never really. Whatever. Asta would question who the second person was, because of the fact that they still hadn't shown up. It would have been a while. It would have ended up taking a while for the mage to show up. He would have actually ended up showing up quite late before introducing themselves as said missing mage. They would greet Asta with a stink bug, and the mage would show no intention of wanting to get along with the others. He would even state that he was only here to mock everyone else. Asta would be informed of the fact that the teams had already been decided, so he couldn't switch out to the team that he was currently part of. This would greatly frustrate Asta, but he would accept the bad hand that he was dealt here. Asta's team would have been first in the exam. Asta's team was meant to protect the crystal from being destroyed by another team. Asta would encase the crystal within a Christmas tree, and he would focus on fighting the other teams. Just team. Asta would charge towards the other team, and he would counter one of their members' fire magic with his ice. Asta would grab Magna's face and turn him into a toy right after, shocking everyone there. Mimosa had witnessed him use this move only once before, and even now it still kinda terrified her. But Asta would confirm that they had nothing to fear about, since he actually found a way to reverse the effects of this magical spell. He would be sure to reverse it after the exam was over with, his fight with Magna's team. Asta would continue moving forward, and he would actually summon hail to rain down on his enemies in this match. They would shield their crystal though, and shoot high-scale magical attacks at the duo of Asta and Mimosa. Asta and Mimosa were trying to block the attacks, but a counter trap would appear around them. They would be confused at first until they saw the trap absorb and reflect the attacks onto their casters. The enemies during the match would be knocked out, and Zerx would actually walk forward, grabbing onto the crystal. He would crush it within his hand. Asta would walk over to Magna, who he had actually turned into a nutcracker here, and he would reverse the effects of his magic. Of course, turning Magna back into, human. Several matches would go on afterward, but a fight that was really worth mentioning was the fact that Asta fought Lagris. You see, in this, Asta didn't really know Finral all that well, but he still saw the male as a magical knight worthy of respect. Lagris managed to defeat his brother with relative ease in their fight, and he would even leave his brother unconscious, but he was supposed to leave him unconscious in order to get some medical help, But no, he didn't stop there. He instead was about to launch an attack that would kill his own brother. But Asta, Magna, and Luck were all able to sense the intent behind his attack. They would all make their way over to Langris's location, pointing their own sets of attacks at him. Langris would be infuriated at the fact that these guys were trying to protect such a weakling, or at least somebody he viewed as a weakling. Langris would request to fight Asta specifically though, after hearing about how the boy used to look up to people like him. Now he really just had a disdain for people like him, and that would try and use the magical knight status in order to justify their actions. Julius would allow it so long as they respected the rules of the match. Asta would turn back to his teammates and apologize for moving up their fight. He would explain his desire to take down somebody so prideful and inconsiderate like Langris. The two would understand though, and they would all prepare for their fight. Asta would summon a Christmas tree golem around himself, and he would go in to attack Langris. Langris would use his spatial magic in order to block his attacks though. While doing so, Langris would actually notice that his arms were beginning to feel numb. He figured it may have been something of Asta's doing, considering its weird multi-elemental magic. Asta would pummel Langris into the ground once the numbness spread to the rest of his body though. He would use his golem in order to launch himself toward Langris's team's crystal. He would form more hail, distracting his opponents who were busy trying to cover their crystal. Asta would turn them into toys though. He would let the rest of the process take its place afterwards, with of course the hail just raining down on the crystal, completely shattering it. Langris's crystal would be destroyed, and Asta's crystal would actually remain intact. Asta's team would have won this match, but right after, Asta would collapse from the excess usage of his mana without refueling it from earlier on. Basically, he never had his milk and cookies, so of course his mana was going to be on the lower side for something like this. A few days later, Asta would wake up and find that he was unable to actually fight Yuno. Although he was disappointed, he wouldn't be able to dwell in it for too long, because of the fact that Leona would barge into his room. She would grab him and bring him over to the base. He would actually find that Noelle and Luck would have been in her grasp as well. She would inform Asta of the fact that each one of them had passed the exams, and therefore they would be coming with her. So of course they would be dragged over to the gathering of the Royal Knights, and they would find out that the person masquerading as Zerx, well, it turned out that he was actually a black bull all along, and his real name was Zora too. Everyone would be ordered to suit up into their robes for the mission they would be a part of. They would be raiding the Eye of the Midnight Sun's base, and they would be taking down their leader as well. Asta would be placed Asta would actually be placed onto a team with Zora and Leona. They were allowed to fight in any way they found fit for this occasion. Once they entered the base, Leona would single-handedly take down 3 members from the Midnight Sun. Leona would also shoot her fire at Asta when she realized that there were 2 of him all of a sudden. Leona would single out the fake though from the attack, since she recognized how Asta used his magic. Raya, basically the copycat, would go on to fight Leona, only to find that he was in the middle of a losing battle. Raya would use his self-destruct spell in order to kill them all off in one quick fashion, but Asta would encase him in his roots, keeping the explosion contained. When finding out about how his captain, Rill, was possessed, Asta would go on to counter his attacks as well. He would turn Rill into a toy for now, and he would deal with the mess later on. 3 other elves would show up onto the scene, only for Asta to use his roots to grab and immobilize each and every last one of them. He would turn each of them into toys as well, putting them into a sack that he had found nearby. A big red sack, actually. Asta would continue moving forward, eventually making his way into I can barely pronounce this guy's name. Basically, the guy with the squid magic. That's all you really need to know. And he would actually make it into the leader of the Midnight Sun's lair. There he would find the possessed Claus, and the trapped Mimosa. He would do his best in order to free Mimosa, while also speaking to as well. He was trying to snap his brother out of whatever he was in. A possessed Claus were trying to attack Asta though, but he would get taken down rather easily by the boy. After declaring how was meant to be his rival for who would become Wizard King, the black-haired boy would awaken right then and there. The two would take on the remaining elves in their location, and this would catch the attention of Lick. The two would prepare to find the individual, only for him to actually close the distance at an incredible speed. The boys would be caught off guard at the pure raw speed of this elf. Asta would try to have his roots wrap around Lick's feet, but he would simply slice his restraints apart. This would shock Asta due to him cutting them with such ease. Asta would stare down Lick, and the temperature within the room would begin to drop. Asta would become faster, but Licht would still be able to keep up. Asta would continue to get overwhelmed by Licht. Even when joined in and they tried to double team the elf, it would have made little difference though, until he recognized that his arms were beginning to get numb. He would use this moment to at least remove the two boys from his presence, since he had a feeling that they had something to do with the slowly deteriorating body. Nozel would find that Nozel would end up finding the boys, and he would rescue them right then and there. They would be in the middle of flying to the capital when Asta and recognized there being civilians within their home village that were getting attacked by possessed magic knights. Asta and would jump off and deal with the elves there. Eventually they would make their way back to the capital. Asta would summon a slave for himself and in order to make faster progress, but something would be different with the summoning. Rather than there just being some toy reindeer to pull a sleigh, Asta would find that the deer from all those months ago was actually pulling his sleigh. There would be multiple reindeer actually pulling the sleigh, but only one of them would of course have a glowing red nose. The reindeer were even able to fly, pulling Asta and into the sky as well. This would amaze the boys, as this would basically be the first time they would be flying in this sort of way. Asta was keeping all of the elves he had turned into toys in, of course, the big red sack. He would have kept it on his sleigh as well. By the time they managed to make it back to the capital, they would find a dark portal around the area too. Asta and would help take down as many elves as possible that were giving the other magic knights trouble. They would then enter the portal alongside Yami and the other captains. While within the gate, Nozel would observe the place and you would find that it was seemingly a space between the living realm and the afterlife. The group would scatter around the palace that they found themselves in, though. Well, no, let me rephrase that. The group ended up getting scattered across the whole of the palace. They would be confused as to which parts they were in, especially Asta at first. Asta would have found himself with Mimosa in one part of the palace. They weren't exactly sure which part until Mimosa mapped out the whole entire location. She would inform Asta where exactly they were in. Apparently, they were in what seemed to be a corridor connecting two rooms together. The elves were scattered all throughout the palace, and if they wanted to regroup with the others, well, of course they would have to fight off the elves too. When it came onto the top floor, that would be where Licht was located. Asta would accept those odds and he would begin to charge forward. They would eventually find Juno, but there would also be a devil within the room. At least they assumed there was one. They weren't completely sure for the moment, but this certainly did give off devilish vibes. They would be wary of said devil, but he would show very little attention to the humans within the room. Zagrid's attention would be on the elf. Yuno would inform the others on how this devil was actually the mastermind behind everything. The two would agree to fight the being and charge at him. Swords would suddenly begin to rain down, but Asta would summon another golem in order to protect himself and Yuno. The golem would have ended up taking the brunt of the damage, while Asta would shoot hail at Zagrid. Yuno would also shoot a wind spell at the devil. Icicles would also end up appearing, piercing through various parts of Zagrid. Zagrid would be impressed at the fact that the boys were even able to harm him in the first place. Zagrid would comment on their magic though. It seemed like Yuno's own was that of an elf and a spirit mixed together, while Asta was also a spirit. But he wasn't able to recognize what other thing that was mixed in with said magic. He knew that it wasn't just regular old magic. He would try to heal from the attacks, but find himself incapable of doing so. This would confuse him and cause him to become slightly fearful, slightly wary of the boys now. The elf that was in the room with them would give into his dark emotions, and he would become a dark elf at that moment, with a 5-leaf clover grimoire. Zagrid would take their now 5-leaf clover grimoire and leave, going to the top. He would order for Pantry to go on a rampage against the boys. It would be a struggle fighting off the dark elf, but Nozel would eventually arrive in order to actually help out the boys. Nozel would manage to restrain the elf, and Asta would use this moment in order to try turning them into a toy. Rather than simply turning the dark elf into a toy though, Asta would see the memories of said elf and would actually convince them to help fight off Zagrid. Pantry would be returned back to normal at that moment, and of course Asta would explain the situation to Nozel. Hearing this, Nozel would assign Asta, Yuno and Pantry to take down Zagrid. Nozel and Mimosa, they would evacuate everyone else. The three would make their way to the top, only to find that Licht was in the middle of a battle against the devil. Zagrid would notice their arrival and the reversal of his effects on Pantry. He would find Asta's magic to be the most troublesome though within the whole of the group, since even now it was slowing him down. He was incapable of healing from attacks dealt upon by Asta after all, which was incredibly weird for Zagrid. This was the first time something like this ever happened. The Lamille Silvermillion Clover and a black-haired girl would also arrive to deal with Zagrid though. It would be a 5-man team against Zagrid. Asta would glare at Zagrid, causing for his body temperature to begin to drop, but Zagrid would begin to also feel sluggish during this fight. He would still be willing to fight, but Lamille would send in multiple attacks at Zagrid. Zagrid would attempt to counterattack, but Asta would pound him with a hailstorm. With this direction made, Asta would also end up grabbing onto Zagrid's limbs with his roots. Licht would take this opportunity to absorb all of the power of the elves and harness it in his sword. He would use it to obliterate Zagrid. Asta would notice that Zagrid's heart was still beating though. Asta would shoot an icicle through his heart, effectively killing the devil. The devil's spell was now devouring the Shadow Palace. Instead of disappearing, the structure was collapsing, and Lamille's body was beginning to break down too. In desperation to get out of the Shadow Palace, time would seemingly slow down for Asta. As he summoned his sleigh, he would grab everybody within the room and put them on his sleigh. The sleigh would seemingly have infinite room as he put, of course, even people like Yami onto the sleigh. They would fly out to the Shadow Palace with everyone seemingly intact besides Lamille. Asta would begin to cheer until Nozel mentioned how the fight wasn't over yet. They still needed to figure out a way to reverse the reincarnation spell. Licht would offer to volunteer for this requirement, for this need that they still had. He would first reverse the reincarnation spell on Patry, which would allow for William Vengeance, well, of course, the William Vengeance being, well, the captain of the Golden Dawn, to actually take back control of his body. Licht would then combine his magic with William's own. William's World Tree magic would spread all throughout the Clover Kingdom, and it would begin to glow after combining with Licht's sword magic. They would be able to communicate the truth of what really happened all the many centuries ago, and they would reverse the effects of the reincarnation spell. On top of that, Licht would be affected in the end, unfortunately, and all of the souls would also leave the magical knight's bodies, the souls of the fallen elves. Asta would learn later that he also had the ability to control time while on his sleigh, which was a rather interesting ability to have. He had seen how useful time magic was back at the Shadow Palace and when it came on to Julius as well, so this was rather new for Asta. While all of the different magical types, with all of these different magical types combined into one, Asta would go on to defeat many other enemies of the Clover Kingdom, and over the years, Asta would be recognized for his merits. He would even become a magical captain himself. He would name his squad the White Reindeer, and he would end up being in a bit of conflict with Ralph for a bit, this being due to it seemingly looking like Asta just ripped off his team's whole name, with just some, at least when it came onto the spirit animal, you could say. Asta would calm him down though by showing that he took inspiration from one of his own spells, hence why he decided to go with Reindeer for his team name. when it came on to he would actually take over the Spade Kingdom, taking his rightful throne. But he would still keep in contact with Asta. He would even congratulate him when he found out that Asta was announced the Wizard King one day too. Asta would have grown a long white beard and he would go for a red and white suit moving forward. Asta, as Wizard King, would finally bring unity to the realms within the Clover Kingdom. There would still be some discrimination, but it would not be nearly as prevalent as when he was growing up. Asta would marry Mimosa too, since she was always the nicest to him, not caring for his status as a commoner. The two would be happy and grow old together. They would even have children too. The Clover Kingdom would respect Asta and nickname the boy Santa after a couple toddlers mispronounced his name one day while he was delivering gifts all throughout the kingdom. This would be one of Asta's ways to make sure the kingdom was running smoothly firsthand. It would become a tradition for the people to call him Santa, and they would even leave milk and cookies for him to consume too. In exchange, presents would be found for them. They would have this every December 25th, and they would dub this day Christmas. And that is the end of this What If, guys. It is your boy King Ty Next signing out. You guys already know the deal. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace.